Alright, 6 Days of Glory. This is sort of an in-between scale game using similar but not quite the same rules as some of the other Zucker designs. In particular, it doesn't have the operations points, and trying to think what else. I don't remember what else is really kind of not there out of what I'm used to. So I'm used to the operational and I guess the tactical games, although I don't know if I've played any of them yet. I've peeked at them. And in the operational games, very much you're expending these points that are coming from your supply source. This is no longer there, and in fact maintaining your supply line is a lot less important in this design than it is in some of the others. Now, if you watched my first playthrough, the abortive one, my second playthrough, the profane one, you're definitely going to get the opinion that, man, this guy hates these games, especially this one. And, well, I have my issues with it, there's no question. If you watch the third playthrough, it's all in one video like the abortive one, you might get a view that's closer to the truth. What's hard here is that it's tough for me to even really grasp what I want to say about this game. And honestly, about Zucker games in general. Because one of the things that I do when I look at this is I try to say, okay, why is it that these games never satisfy me? And one part of it may be there's a tendency for there to be a low counter density, not a lot going on, not a lot of complexity on the field itself. What there are is these agonizing decisions of, wow, where do I move? And then this geometric optimization is basically all I can say. You're counting hexes and trying to find the perfect hex so that you can move where you want to next time, yet maybe the other guy can't cut you off properly, and you're putting the right threat. And it's a headache to me. And it's not fun. And there are some games where I can forgive that. Afrika Korps is one of them. But too many of the Zucker designs, and this one definitely, are about that. Now, I'll say this much. With enough playing, I got used to pull out Europa Simulations All Is Lost Save Honor, which very much uses a more classic Zucker system as its core movement and command control system. It's got a lot more going on in it though. And again, if you're at all interested in that era and or like the Zucker style games, take a look at that one. It's really good for what it does. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about a few things here. Components is one of them. Components is a big one. Because Clash of Arms puts a lot of money into their components. And they make these wonderfully heavy maps with a beautiful texture that I just love to rub my fingers across. But in this game, at least, with tiny hexes, it ended up an unplayable mess. It pooches too much, it pops up. I had to resort to what I hate doing, which is, in the third playthrough, I played it with plexiglass. And that solved a lot of my problems with the game, to be honest. But there are others, and some of them came from playing, some of the resolution came from playing them enough times that, you know, I was no longer, I had figured out my peace with them, as it were. One of them is the appearance of the map. Again, a beautiful map. This is a Rick Barber map, and this is the style that I like the appearance of when he does it. But it's impossible to see what's going on. And the problem is when he does ones that it's very easy to see what's going on, they look almost like a young child drew them. Because when you're trying to be that clear with that kind of map, with that kind of hand-drawn appearance, it doesn't look good. As far as player aids, all you really have is these setup and reinforcement tables, which are not terribly easy to use. There are some differences in how they're represented because basically they handle multiple scenarios, but there's some weird crap in the game where units are moving around on the board, yet you don't see them on the board, and they just show up in the middle of somewhere based on based on when they're activated. Now, if you get close to them, you bring them on wherever they are. And what's kind of weird there, and what you might be trying to optimize in terms of that, in addition to the geometry, is you can look and see, gee, where are the Russians moving around right now? Are they in a good position on this turn or not? Because they're not really going anywhere in particular. They're just kind of milling around where they start, but they keep moving around, and some of their setups are really lousy. So that would be a weird thing to optimize against, but you can do that. The core situation is an interesting one. Napoleon comes on the map. He's got a few light forces facing him. He probably wants to knock those out, and then he wants to go divide and hit. There's two major Allied forces he wants to break into each of them separately. And that's a really interesting situation. The first time I played it, Napoleon got himself caught, surrounded by these two forces, and destroyed. The second time I played it, he managed to chase one of the forces down, and the fight was not as unequal as I thought. I thought there would be a fairly significant advantage in favor of Napoleon, but his forces didn't arrive as well as I wanted them to, and he ended up in kind of a close fight there. Had to throw himself into combat and ended up getting killed. And if you kill Napoleon, that's an automatic victory for the coalition in the game. So that's what happened in both the games that I completed. And you could say, well, you were risking Napoleon. Yeah, but I kind of felt like I needed to because he gives a full column shift in combat. It's because of his hat. Okay. The rules themselves are kind of a mess. There's a significant amount of errata in them. They are a different flavor. There's a lot of significant differences of this game from other games, and even from other Zucker designs. And it's particularly hard. This is the first in the series, and it's particularly hard to try to understand what's going on, especially when there's a significant amount of rules that are just like, oh hey, this shouldn't be here. There's a fair number of them that are that. There's player's notes that rely on the rules as written, and the errata overrides the rules as written. So that's kind of weird too. Obviously they were intended as written, more or less. And then sometime after the game started being played, I think somebody said, yeah, this isn't going to work. It's actually a couple of years later that these rules changes are all completed. Now, yes, there are games that make little rules changes and clarifications throughout, but very seldomly do they withdraw whole rules like that. Some systems do. You see that in the CWB system, but you usually say, well, it played okay the other way. I'm not sure this played okay the other way. Okay, what about the core of the game in terms of... let me see what I can capture here in terms of the thoughts. So you have this... First of all, this is really weird, but on daytime turns, the French go first. On nighttime turns, the coalition goes first. So you have these two weird turn flip-flops right in a row. And that's something that just kind of totally wasn't something I expected, even though I kind of read it. And in terms of effect, think about, if you played the old Third Reich, the effect of getting a turn flip like that. It's huge, right? Well, now you have a game where you're seeing a turn flip on what? 2 out of the 3 turns in the game. 2 out of every 3 turns in the game. Yeah. Who do they favor? Well, they favor the French. And that's kind of cool. Because the French need all the help they can get. Yeah, but it's a tiny pipe. And I'm doing good overall. Okay. So at the beginning of a day turn, you have a command and reorganization phase. And the first thing you do there is if you have some damaged units that have the capability to recover i.e. they're far enough from the enemy and they've taken their losses long enough ago and they're not demoralized and this, that, and the other, they can recover a couple of units. And those units come back at a step loss type thing. And okay, that's kind of neat. And then those units aren't going to be able to move that turn. The next thing you do is you do a command phase, which is similar to other Zucker games, which is to say you're going to be spending points to activate leaders, and those leaders get all their underlings, all their subordinate command, in this case a whole corps worth, activated if they're within range. But the difference is you're not spending a set of points that you have, this singular quantity of that has other uses as well. In normal Zucker games, the points that you spend are going help you with your attrition. So they're kind of like, reserve command capability that's just always available to you, but if you spend it, it's gone. And it's always available to you in this good kind of way, in the sense that your supplies are moving up quicker and you're getting all kind of great stuff because you have you haven't been giving orders. Now, it doesn't matter, because units that you don't give orders to in both this and the other Zucker games, you roll a die and you get a chance to move them. And if they have good leaders, you can move them anyway. So usually in those games, you save your points until, I really need to spend a point here. And, it's that decision that's kind of painful there. Here, there isn't that painful decision, and I can guarantee you I prefer the least painful decisions possible, the happier I am, right? I don't play games for those, this is a significant decision point, That's just not my thing. I want the story to unfold, especially in a war game. In this case, Napoleon can activate 3 of his corps if he's within range of them. Well, this creates a geometrics problem that's bigger than in the other games, because you always have to kind of keep your commands together so that you can activate the troops that that you really need to activate. In which case, Napoleon's got to keep everybody within a couple of hexes of him that he really wants to have doing something. Now, there are other commanders who can activate stuff, even on the French side, but they have very limited capabilities. They can activate their own corps for free all the time, which I think is kind of weird. And then they can also activate one other unit, which might be a corps. That's the other thing. If you want to, force an independent unit or a baggage train or something like that to move, you have to spend your activation on that, and very few activations here. So your independent stuff kind of stays off on its own, and you just hope it can do something when it has to. Then, if you have any leaders, you roll their initiative, and maybe their units are all under command. And anything that's not able to trace to the command is just out of command. It'll have another chance at initiative a little later. And then you move the units that are in command. Anything funky about movement? Yeah, kind of. So there's the road movement rules, which are a little weird, which is that at any point you can declare you're in a road column, but you can't be stacked at any point during that time, I guess. And you kind of get to move along roads at a cheaper rate than normally. You can always move along roads at a cheaper rate. It's just here you're moving at half instead of 1 or whatever. Okay, great. Now, in order to get out of road column to deploy your forces, you have to pay a movement point. And this causes some weird kind of, not sure that I'm doing it right in terms of, well, can I move into the hex where somebody else is and then deploy, or do I have to deploy behind them, And you have units that are like, presumably not on the road in a chateau or a village or something, and you can't march through them because you're in road column, So there's a lot of stuff there that you're kind of like, well, maybe these rules aren't complete enough to handle the situation, but whatever. You can it's something that can be coped with. And then all the remaining units that don't have commands, you can roll an initiative roll against their individual initiatives, And if they succeed, they get to move. And there's not much restriction on their movement, but they are out of command, which means that they're not going to be able to advance after combat. That's pretty much the big thing. Then you go to combat, which is going to be on something that looks like it's out of 1972. Not just a CRT, but a very, very old style CRT. The one difference with it is it does have some in-between odds. So it has 1.5 to 1, 2.5 to 1, and I believe it has a 1 to 1.5, but not a 1 to 2.5. There's a level to which these things get too complicated. There's optional rules that allow you to include bonuses for combined arms, and also there are rules to give leaders some of the leaders provide some bonuses in combat. Okay. Cav are allowed to withdraw before combat. The combat is your standard Napoleon at Waterloo combat with the concept of bombardment in place from those games, which is that like artillery can fire without getting hurt if it fires on its own, except that it's done at a 1 hex range instead of 2, which is just a little weird, but yeah, it doesn't really do much. All units that are in an enemy zone of control have to attack. All units must be attacked that are in your enemy zone of control. Stuff like that. Okay. The night turns are a little different. You have a reorganization phase which doesn't do much. It just slides. It says that units that were damaged that day are now prepared to be reorganized. The command segment, you're not going to be able to move any of your units unless they are in command. So only the units that you spend your commands for get to operate at all, which is a little different. You have this supply segment where you check your supply line back to your original depot, but that ends up... There's one modifier to that, which is you have these baggage trains. And the baggage train is going to be able to extend your supply line down a road. So you park it on a road, and then you can trace back to your supply depot. And that means that you really kind of have to protect your route, at least your baggage train, and the route back from it as well. You can't let that get cut. Except that being out of supply isn't necessarily that big a deal. It hurts your mobility for the most part. You can't force march. It also throws you into a demoralized state, which means you can't advance after combat, and you have some trouble recovering troops. So it has an effect, but it's not as bad as in some games. It's not like your strength in combat's halved or anything. Alright, stacking is just cracked in this game. That's all I have to say about it. Basically, you're able to stack an entire corps anywhere you like, or 2 units. You can't stack your corps with an additional unit with it, or part of your corps with an additional unit, even though they come in stacked together, I think, in one case, but whatever. You can't protect your baggage trains and bridging trains with the corps. You're going to have to detach a unit for it. For the most part, it actually kind of works, but there are certain circumstances where it's just, you're saying, this can't be right. You know, this is just unreasonable. And there's definitely that feeling at times. It's got old style, old school zones of control here. You move into them, you're frozen, you must attack. There are some modifiers to that based on some of the terrain, but not much. Leader's primary capability here is to activate units and move them. You have vedettes. These show up in some of the later Zucker games. They didn't show up in the old ones. In this case, you're breaking down cav units into little pieces. And I had trouble trying to even figure out a useful way to use these. The game seems to indicate, the player's notes, etc., that you really need these. You need to kind of put them out as a cloud in front of you. Well, they're trivial to push away. So if you know the other guy's got vedettes in front, it's not going to make a difference. If he's got one unit in a stack in front, chances are your big corps can just shove it out of the way. And it doesn't really cost it anything to do. It doesn't hurt the vidette, but whatever. The one thing I thought of them as being useful for, so the way Fog of War is handled in this game is you have a stack of units or whatever on the board, and then you put one of these little battle flags on top of it. And that means the enemy can't look to see what anything you have in there is. Mechanically, it's a painful solution because even as the person who owns the pieces, you have to kind of paw through your pieces to figure out what the hell you have. But Fog of War is a pain in the ass, right? In almost any implementation that you can come up with. Okay. So, it doesn't really hide what's out there. If I'm moving a stack this big towards you, you know I got a whole corps. And if you've seen which corps it is, you know how strong it is, you know? So you can even count strength points if you're like careful at keeping track of what's going on. And you can, you know, get exact odds optimizations there. However, if you break a couple of cav units down from a corps and turn them into stacks of vedettes, you could conceivably move them together. Now they have to be from a corps. And the reason for that is there's things like Cossacks you can turn into a stack of vedettes, but that doesn't help you because you can't move all of them. You're not going to be able to put them all in command, and then your chance of actually moving any, you're going to be rolling a die for each unit, and it's going to be moving in the non-commanded phase, and it's going to be pretty obvious that you've got a stack of vedettes coming at them. So you got to take regular corps units. There aren't a lot of corps that are capable of producing enough vedettes to really fool someone. The French have both of them, the Guard Cavalry and the Cav Corps. And those are the two that you could do this with. I didn't see an opportunity to really use them. So the only thing I broke vedettes down for was they have a higher strength. Now the game's the same play suggestions that say you want lots of vedettes out, etc., also make a suggestion that vedettes help you in exchange losses, and errata, written a few years later, says no, they're not it doesn't work that way, basically. So if you play with the modern rules to the game, there's basically no reason for them that I can see, except maybe the French can trick someone. Okay, movement, pretty standard except for that road march issue that I was talking about. You got restrictions at night for movement. You can't move into a zone of control. Nighttime's also the only time you can withdraw from the enemy. Otherwise, zones of control are fixed until battle drives things one way or another. Special rules in here for bridging the rivers, pontoon bridges, blowing up bridges, stuff like that. Nothing too complex here. And actually, it's fairly simple to repair the bridges. It's got repulse rules, which allow you to shove away weaker units. This is somewhat dangerous. You see one unit there, you don't know how many strength points it is. Well, if you got a whole corps hitting that unit, there's a fair chance that you can get the required 5-to-1 odds. But it's not guaranteed. There are units that are 5 or 6 strength points that I don't think there's corps that can knock out of the way. Maybe something like the Young Guards can knock them out of the way. 5-point unit. But they're 6-point units, and you can't knock them out of the way. Which means you'll be stuck fighting that unit, and you'll have 2 odds shifts against you. Which is pretty bad. The actual combat, nothing too exciting there. Some terrain effects, obviously, which are less drastic than in many games. Some special effects for the guards, which are kind of weird. And basically the concept with attack is that you're going to try to surround the enemy, cut him off, so that when he gets a retreat, he's eliminated instead, and he's eliminated for good. He won't be able to recover. And that's what you aim to do. You aim to get slightly better, slightly decent odds that you're probably going to move the enemy and hope that you wreck his unit. And even 1-to-1 will do it 2/3 of the time, because he either has to retreat or you get an exchange. Now, an exchange is bad because you lose units, but your units aren't permanently lost unless you did something really dumb. You've got the ability to soak off attacks and stuff like that. The game takes into account demoralization, but that's taken into account by a singular value for each core, which is more complex than most games of this level, right? In terms of simplicity. The amount of losses that each core takes are tracked separately. Once they reach a certain limit, they're now demoralized. They're going to have a penalty recovering units. They can't advance after combat. They can regain their morale by recovering points. And if they do that, well, then they're back functional again. Of course, they're still not as big a force as they used to be, because when you recover units, they come back with step reduced, essentially. I've already talked a little bit about the effects of supply and how little they have on it. Reinforcements are just weird. With them showing up in the middle of the map. It's like Reforger sites in NATO, except that these seem to represent there are people moving around on the map, and nobody knows really where they are unless they look at the timetable, and that's about it. Some of the special rules, the Old Guard have certain special bonuses and penalties. If you demoralize those, if you break those suckers, there's a penalty. And again, this is an option. Cav being able to retreat before combat's an option. Combined arms is an option. I strongly suggest using any of these, any and all of them. Some rules over here that are supplemental that they withdrew from the game. Okay, so one of the weird things is mud. Each afternoon turn, the roads become, the path, the movement rates off-road for wheeled units becomes really, really painful. That's about it there. The scenario victory conditions itself, I thought, were completely broken. Apparently, again, that errata that came out a couple years later, right? I think. I don't know. Where's our copyright on this thing? The copy I have says 97, but no, the game came out in 97, so it came out about the same time. So they withdrew the rules pretty early. So, yeah, without that piece of errata, and whoever I bought this game for added all of the errata except that one piece, the game's just broken in that case. The allies can just win automatically. And that's how I played the first two. It wasn't until I scanned through the errata, because that situation seemed so stupid, that I found that. And it is indeed, I think, the only piece of errata he didn't add. I thought he missed something over here, but it's actually on the chart correctly. Alright, so what... I mean, obviously this gave me a hellish time the second time I played it. And what is so wrong with it? Well, one thing is that geometric optimization and that, oh my god, these tough decisions. That's just not my kind of play, And I can get kind of used to it and start enjoying it sometimes. I did with Always Lost Save Honor. The third playing of this was much less painful, especially with the plexiglass. But that's about the extent of it. I mean, Napoleon at Bay, probably the Zucker design that before this recent couple of games that I've been playing, that I most enjoyed and most kind of got a grasp on. That's the simplest of them. And I played it once or twice, and it kind of gelled together for me, and I said, okay, this isn't so bad. It's not really just an incredibly painful Napoleon at Waterloo, which is what I sometimes got the feeling of, is I'd be fighting with Napoleon at Waterloo combat tables, and then have these hideous things that I'm trying to do to get the proper leverage to make that Napoleon at Waterloo rule system work in a way that, reflects the period a little bit better than that system does. And it does do that. It actually really kind of does. I mean, you're trying to position yourself to outflank, to surround if possible. Although I don't know about the surrounding part. That starts getting a little weird, to tell you the truth. That's not a common Napoleonic practice, really. But certainly on a battlefield level, it was more so. If you get forces like a square or something trapped, and you start shooting it up from both sides, that thing's going to surrender, and that's what you're looking at. I think the operational, grand tactical, whatever level of trying to isolate units like that, I don't remember too many instances of it. Maybe one of our more astute Napoleonic historians is able to give me a little bit more insight in that, and maybe give me some schooling. But I don't think that's a real big part of... I mean, obviously, if you manage it, it's a big deal. The problem is it seems fairly easy to get, because you want to keep your stacks kind of big or else they get beaten up and misused. And so it's fairly easy to get caught in that kind of situation. But then when you do get caught in that kind of situation, well, you're probably facing a 1/3 chance or something of your force being destroyed if the enemy has a right to really be attacking you in terms of his strength points. Trying to create something like a continuous line, well, that's not going to work, because you can just repulse somebody out of the way and push forward and take, the position that you want. The only advantage is if you can get, some sort of go-like structure where you can't just attack one unit, but there's some space between. And, this particular game, there aren't enough units on the board. There aren't enough stacks of reasonable size on the board that you can do this. If you split up a unit into two pieces, does it really get... Is it significantly more defensible? Well, maybe not, because the bombard rules say I can use a 1-point artillery or whatever to bombard one unit, and then I can get really good odds against the other unit. So I really don't see too many ways where you're going to have anything like a historical deployment of Napoleonic forces, which isn't really a dense line, but more a number of corps kind of forming a line with spaces between it. Very much like the every other unit type of feel that you're supposed to defend with in the operational games that this directly draws from. It's just very, very difficult for me to put my finger on, how I feel about this game, because obviously it doesn't play to the things that I like most about a game, but then, and that makes it difficult for me to fully explore it, although, I gave this as much of a chance as I can. But once you get through that, it feels like it's trying to do things that take it to a higher level than that Napoleon at Waterloo type system, or than that Avalon Hill Classic, or whatever. And it feels like it's getting them right, mostly. But on the other hand, I think there may be enough that it's getting wrong that it all kind of falls back and doesn't really go beyond that level. I know, again, Marcus STA, U Stumpeter or something like that, I can't remember the names, has done a combat system, maybe not for this, but for the Last Days type games and such not. And I really ought to take a look at that, because maybe that's giving it enough richness that it doesn't become this stupid hex counting optimization of geometry anymore. Because that's what really kills me with this system, is I feel like I'm playing Afrika Korps. And, I'm okay with Afrika Korps as Afrika Korps. I don't really want any more of them. It's not just this game, though. Ancient Battles Deluxe gave me that same feel. I suspect that the Napoleonic 20 series will give that same kind of feel. You start putting too few pieces on the board, where they're abstracting away, a lot of the units that are out there. And I start getting very uncomfortable and feeling like I'm not playing something that's similar to the battle it's representing or whatever. I'm playing something that's closer to chess, where, I can almost guarantee certain results by putting pieces somewhere. 2/3 of the time I can outflank the enemy, I don't care what the situation, and expect to destroy him. Well, that feels a little too in the bag to me, right? I don't know. And we're talking about 1-to-1 odds here. I could do this, right? That's weird. Anyway, that's the kind of, gosh, this doesn't feel very realistic to me. On the other hand, how is it for the competitive gamer? Because that's almost always the dichotomy is, okay, one of these games, and this is fairly well regarded for some reason with all the errors and everything in it. Well, certainly there's a fair amount of, okay, I can, there's this, I can guarantee I get this. I think that appeals to the competitive gamer to some extent. But there's a huge amount of randomness when it comes down to, which unit does my enemy get to move that he didn't set up and expend his command points for. I saw a couple of cases where that felt like that was a pretty big deal, especially in that second big game. I think the the coalition was able to get that envelopment from that reason. I also saw other aspects where it felt like there was a fairly big luck roll. Hey, you throw Napoleon in 1 in 6 chance if you lose the battle or whatever, you lose the game. Each time that happens. Pretty big swing, right? But it's over fast then, right? So it's not like you're stuck playing a losing situation. You take your best shot. You improve your odds the best you can, and you're either going to, maybe do okay or lose the game. And that sounds good. It's better than, geez, I'm going to sit here losing the game for the next 6 hours. It moves pretty quickly. There aren't a lot of pieces on the board. These are things that the competitive gamer tends to like, from what I've seen. But I do worry that there maybe is too much randomness in here. On the other hand, with the fog of war and everything, I'm always iffy on that. I'm always wondering, well, who really likes that? Who's really in favor of, I don't know what there is. There's something nice about not being able to count the stack and optimize your odds. And I think this game hits, in terms of historical accuracy, the right level of fog of war, which is like, there's a big stack there, but you don't know what's in it. There's troops, but you can't count it exactly and know what your chances are. So that adds a little bit of randomness. Of course, if you do put the effort to memorize what's where, well, hey, that's the kind of gamer I'm just not. Enjoy yourself, right? But whatever. Anyway, these games definitely intrigue me in the sense of they're capturing a level of the conflicts, and this is for all of them, that usually isn't captured in even this much detail. But then, on the other hand, the actual gameplay aspects are just so miserable to my tastes that it just doesn't hold up for me. And I always walk away with this may be a really good game. I feel this one less than some of the others, maybe. But I don't know. We haven't thought too hard about the others yet, right? We weren't too impressed with the Battle for Italy, so maybe this one's not too much better. But I often walk away with there may be a very interesting game here. There may be a lot more that I can do, but I'm not able to enjoy it enough to want to explore it to that depth. And that's been the case with every single one. The one that came the closest, other than Napoleon at Bay, which I don't feel deserved more effort than I put into it, although I did get some enjoyment out of it. The one that I thought intrigued me the most was Struggle of Nations. And that game, the physical components, the fucking Avalon Hill one-piece board that when you try to get it to lay flat by bending it back, snapped into 12 pieces, and now I can play with plexiglass, I guess. But that game, the game with rules questions that were essentially counter corrections. This counter says 3-5. Is that correct? No, it should be 7-5. That's not a question. I always blame that on Don Greenwood. After reading these rules, I'm convinced that Zucker had a hand in it. 1809 wasn't that bad. Some of the others aren't that bad. But, Napoleon at Bay wasn't that bad. But, man, I have to apologize to good old Don. Maybe he accepted the fact that he allowed Zucker to, have a free hand and do whatever he wanted. I've seen that before, though, where Avalon Hill puts in this Q&A. Anyway, we're just getting kind of into totally random territory here. So we're going to be happy to get back to Great Battles of Alexander. And after that, I don't know where we're going. Obviously, part of me is leaning towards doing the Napoleon at Bay to get a look at one that I have enjoyed and that wasn't as frustrating. Maybe we'll just keep popping games out because they're not really a series. I have to read the rules to each one because they're all very, very, not maybe very different, but they have enough differences. It's like, playing Blue and Gray and playing Napoleon at Waterloo. They kind of got to look at the differences and think about them. So they fit in nicely, interleaved with the Great Battles of History, where I don't have to reread the rules for the most part, but I want something where I have to read rules. But the games don't take that long, so, I don't want to read too many rules. All right, let's set this up. And boy, did we babble forever there.